A simple woman stood at the center of the mat, the frayed ends of her white belt hanging unevenly at her waist. A teenage black belt named Jared pointed at her with a rehearsed grin, loud enough for the parents in the gallery to hear. "Everyone, let's watch how a beginner shows respect. Miss, step forward and bow properly." She did. Once, then again. When he asked, then a third time, as the line of black belts grinned like it was part of a skit. Laughter rippled from the benches along the mirrored wall. A girl whispered to her mother, and the woman gave a soft chuckle, tapping something into her phone. The wood floor beneath Rachel's bare feet was polished to a mirror, catching the light above like water. Every move she made reflected up into the high windows, where the dojo's name gleamed in gold block letters. Jared turned to the group behind him, waving one hand as if he were directing a stage act. "See how deep that bow is real humility." Another student laughed. "She must have trained in the Stone Age." A few phones were raised. Quiet chimes signaled recordings had started. Rachel stood still, head slightly lowered, not in shame but in stillness. Her GI, too large at the shoulders, folded awkwardly across her frame. One of the belt test officials scratched his head, clearly unsure whether she was even supposed to be here. In the corner, beneath the scroll that listed the dojo's official lineage in black ink on rice paper, two investors murmured about the need for higher entrance standards. "Looks like she wandered in from a local rec center," one muttered. Jared clapped his hands once, drawing the room's attention back. "Okay, one more bow, make it good this time." Rachel's gaze didn't flicker. She stepped forward, bent low, and held the position longer than needed. The room quieted slightly, waiting for a misstep or a quip. When she straightened, no one spoke. For a breath, the dojo held still. Then Jared snorted, turned away, and moved to the next student in line. The laughter resumed, quieter now, but no less cutting. Rachel walked back to the side mat and knelt in seiza, hands resting on her thighs, her posture perfect. They thought she was just another woman who didn't belong. Poor, timid, out of place. They didn't know she had bowed in that same spot 20 years earlier, only then. The whole room had bowed back. The Summit Valley Martial Arts Center didn't look like a dojo. It looked like a boutique hotel disguised as one. The floors were jet black laminate that gleamed like lacquered stone, and every wall bore gold accents, vertical stripes, branded quotes, even the hinges of the display cabinets. The trophy case was lit from within, housing medals, plaques, and championship belts, all arranged by decade and donor name. Above it, a calligraphy scroll in a sleek black frame read, "Honor." Its ink strokes clean and mechanical. There was no trace of sweat or wear in the air, only the faint tang of lemon-scented polish and synthetic fabrics. At the entrance, a glass plaque listed the names of the dojo's top-tier patrons. Each donor had their own engraved quote. Rachel passed it each morning without a glance. Her presence in the main training hall stood out instantly. While the other students arrived in tailored GI jackets, embroidered with surnames and regional flags, Rachel wore a plain, slightly faded cotton jai she'd pulled from a secondhand rack. The seams were clean, but the cut was old-fashioned, boxier than the sleek athletic styles around her. Her gear bag was a canvas tote with a broken zipper. Most of the others carried duffels with bold logos stitched into reinforced nylon. She rolled out her mat section in silence, kneeling as others filtered in. No one looked at her. Or rather, they looked through her. The only time attention fell her way was when she became inconvenient. During warm-ups, the circle tightened without her. When drills began, she was the odd number out. The assistant instructor, Lexi Dane, offered no correction. Instead, she raised her voice to demonstrate form corrections with a hint of performance, calling over Rachel, mid-drill. "That's too low. Watch your center line. If you're going to stay, Follow our rhythm. Her tone was flat, her smile paper-thin. A group of teen girls by the mirrored wall giggled while pretending to adjust their belts. One had her phone angled down low, screen recording. Rachel, kneeling alone, retied her belt with deliberate fingers. She missed the angle, looped it again. Slower. The recording caught every step. By the wall near the water cooler, two fathers discussed scholarship recommendations. "We've got to make the junior finals look strong. The scout from Cascade High's coming next month," one said. His gaze flicked toward Rachel. "Honestly, they'll let anyone in these days." The other nodded, sipping from a protein shaker. "If she's new, someone's got a good heart. Or a soft head." The instructor walked through the ranks, offering nods and praise to the top-tier kids. He paused when he reached Rachel. A moment of hesitation. Then he turned to the next line. Nothing said. Nothing needed. The walls displayed oversized portraits of former champions, many of whom were now parents of students in attendance. No one asked who Rachel was. No one wondered why she trained alone or why she didn't register for sparring days. During a self-defense demonstration, she was asked to play the role of attacker while Lexi demonstrated how to disarm someone passively. Twice. Lexi struck too hard. The third time, Rachel caught her balance perfectly. Lexi frowned and turned her back without comment. After the session, students gathered around the trophy case to take group photos. Rachel stepped aside. No one asked her in. A broken board from someone's earlier attempt at a jump kick had been left by the benches, the jagged edge pointing up. Rachel picked it up on her way out, placed it beside the cleaning caddy near the supply closet, and left her sandals at the mat's edge like always. No one noticed, but one elderly visitor, seated near the scroll, watched her leave without saying a word. There was no applause in that room, only polished floors and perfect poses, but none of it felt rooted. Everything gleamed, everything echoed. Behind the shine was something brittle, hollow, and somewhere in that silence, Rachel kept moving composed, invisible, and unshaken. By the time Rachel stepped onto the mat for evening class, her feet were already sore. The foam floor had softened with use, but the long hours of kneeling and silent drills left a dull ache in her joints. She set her sandals neatly beside the line and bowed at the waist. Just once, before taking her place in the row of beginners. No one greeted her. Tonight's class was different. A row of folding chairs had been arranged along the edge for observers, mostly donors, a few local dignitaries, and two men in blazers from a prep academy rumored to be starting a martial arts scholarship program. They sipped bottled water as Jared Thorne, still not out of high school, but already a third-degree black belt, strutted across the mat with a wireless mic clipped to his collar. The lights overhead were brighter than usual, reflecting off the polished mirror in the black floors. He clapped once, turning to the audience. "Let's start with etiquette," he said, his voice full of scripted confidence. "Respect is the foundation of martial arts. Let's use someone here to demonstrate." He scanned the room and pointed. "Rachel, step forward, please." There was no hesitation in her movements. She stood, approached the front line, and bowed with perfect form. Jared nodded toward her with a performative smile. "Excellent. Again. Deeper this time." She did. "Now hold it." Her body stayed folded, unmoving. For several seconds while Jared explained to the crowd how humility taught character. A few parents smiled. One sponsor chuckled. Someone took a photo. "Again," Jared said. She bowed once more. And again. By the fifth repetition, the gesture had lost its meaning. It wasn't instruction. It was theater. He made a half joke about her being the class role model, and a few in the gallery laughed. Rachel said nothing. She simply bowed again, then stepped back into line. Later, when drills began, she was passed over during pairing. The students broke into partners for advanced striking sequences, but no one made eye contact with her. She waited. Then Lexi Dane tossed a pair of hand pads at her feet and said, "Hold for Josh. Would you—" Rachel picked them up without comment. Josh was fast. His kicks were sharp but careless. By the third roundhouse, the pads had turned damp, and her arms ached from the repeated impact. She never flinched. Every blow landed with a thud that echoed slightly off the mirrors. Jared shouted corrections from across the mat. Not at Josh, but at her. Raise it higher. Be steady. You're making him work too hard. When sparring rotations began, she was left to the side. Lexi walked by and tossed her a towel. Help out if you can't keep up, she said under her breath. Not unkind, but not friendly either. Rachel wiped the sweat from the floor where a student had slipped. Her movements were slow, deliberate. She folded the towel and placed it behind the instructor's podium, where no one would trip on it. The etiquette chart taped to the mirror listed words like discipline, focus, and honor in large block letters, flanked by translations in faux Japanese script. Beneath it, Rachel stood alone, her reflection barely registering between the moving bodies. Phones were out again. One of the students in the advanced group tilted his screen toward her, recording her expression as Josh hit the pads again, harder than before. There was nothing dramatic in her face, just concentration, breath measured, eyes forward. When class ended, everyone bowed to the front and clapped. Jared handed out praise like confetti, laughing with parents and offering shoulder taps to favored students. Rachel stayed behind, picking up the pads and folding the damp towel once more. As the last pair of sandals slipped out the door, she placed hers on again, not looking back. The lights dimmed slightly as the staff began wiping down the mirrors. No one said her name. No one said thank you. But a few glanced back, confused for a moment not at what she'd done, but at how still she had been through all of it. Not stiff, not resistant, still. And that stillness had begun to leave a mark. Rachel locked the door behind her and slipped off her sandals. The studio apartment was barely 2 rooms, just enough for a bed, a corner kitchenette, and the narrow space where a stack of books leaned beside a mat she still used for morning forms. She didn't turn on the overhead light. Instead, she reached for the small lamp on the nightstand and let it cast its warm, amber glow across the room. Everything here was simple, clean, intentional. She knelt beside the bed and pulled out the old training box. The lid creaked faintly as it opened. Inside, neatly folded, was her father's G. The fabric had yellowed slightly over the years, but the weight of it in her hands felt unchanged. She held it to her chest for a moment, then laid it flat across the bed. Beneath it was a leather-bound folder with brass corners. She opened it. The deed to Summit Valley Martial Arts Center sat at the top. Her name was inked in clean print along the ownership line, Rachel Callahan, sole inheritor and principal owner. The date was just over 3 years ago. She hadn't told anyone when she bought it, not even her closest friend. The corporate group who had acquired the property after her father's death had turned it into a luxury brand, and she'd quietly purchased it back through a private holding trust. The board members stayed. Kirkland took the helm. She had let them operate as if nothing had changed, choosing instead to watch. At first, she had thought it would fix itself, that the older traditions would push back, that someone would speak up when the showmanship overtook the discipline. But no one had. The calligraphy had been changed. The classes shortened. Sparring now favored speed and spectacle over form and control. Students who struggled were ignored. The ones who performed became stars. She reached for a small envelope tucked into the side of the folder and removed a folded sheet of paper, her father's original dojo manifesto. The ink had bled slightly from sweat or time, but the writing remained legible. At the bottom, in his crisp script, was one of his favorite lines, "Strength means nothing without stillness." Rachel's fingers moved over the words slowly, like tracing the edge of a wound. Beneath the paper was a gold medal from her last competition, the national finals in Denver. She had been 22, already selected for the Olympic team, but a torn ligament during warm-ups ended the dream in a moment. Her father never blamed her. He'd simply said, A warrior's path isn't measured in medals. Then he'd set the medal on the shelf beside his own and told her it belonged there just the same. She lifted the torn photograph from the corner of the box. The edges had split, but the image was still clear. Her younger self, no more than 10, kneeling beside her father at the front of the dojo. She remembered the feel of the mat under her knees, the hush of the room, the certainty in her father's hand resting gently on her shoulder. Now that same room echoed with laughter and fluorescent lights. It had been weeks since she first returned to observe. She hadn't meant to stay silent this long, but the silence had shown her more than questions ever could. She had watched Lexi sneer through corrections, watched Jared treat etiquette like a spotlight routine, watched Kirkland bow deeper to cameras than to elders. Rachel folded the guy back into the box. The deed remained on the bed, its clean text stark in the soft light. She looked at it, then at the line beneath it that listed the founder, Master Callahan, her father. She remembered his voice, low and patient, as he once corrected her stance on the garden mat behind their old house. Root yourself first. Everything that matters grows from there. She stood slowly and turned off the lamp. In the dark, the room returned to stillness. She left the deed on the nightstand, not as a threat, not as a promise, just a quiet reminder of what had been built and what still remained hers. The Summit Valley dojo had never been so crowded. Folding chairs lined the outer edges of the mat, filled with polished shoes and sharp collars. Corporate banners stood on either side of the demonstration floor, each printed with the gold-trimmed dojo emblem and a quote in stylized script, "Discipline first, victory follows." The mats were fresh, matching the branded GI jackets worn by the performing students, crisp white with jet black piping and metallic nameplates. It looked more like a stage than a space for practice. Jared stood in the center, Mike clipped neatly to his collar. He grinned at the crowd and paced as he spoke. "We'll now demonstrate advanced sparring dynamics, precision, timing, and partner awareness." Parents raised phones. An investor leaned forward, watching his son take position opposite a smaller boy near the front. Rachel sat just behind the last row of guests, in the overflow section reserved for latecomers and unimportant eyes. She wore her plain no emblem, no padding. Her feet were bare, folded beneath her, toes against the wall. She watched quietly, unseen. Jared's voice lifted. "Ready, go." The older boy struck quickly, too quickly. The younger child hesitated, missed his step. Jared shouted, "Again," louder this time, pushing them harder, faster. On the next pass, the older boy feinted and pivoted high. The kick landed. The sound was small but sharp, like a palm slapping wet wood. The younger student gasped, stumbled backward, and fell. His belt slipped loose. His hands scrambled at the mat, but he didn't get up. A hush swept the room. The investors froze. Parents lowered their phones. Kirkland took one step forward, but then stopped, scanning for staff. Lexi hesitated, uncertain whether to speak or let Jared take the lead. Rachel stood. She crossed the mat slowly. No one stopped her. No one called out. The black floor glowed faintly beneath her bare feet. She moved to the child without rush, kneeling beside him with practiced care. Her voice, low and calm, asked only one question. "Where?" The boy pointed at his side, eyes watering. Rachel touched the spot gently, checked his breath, then helped him sit. His belt, white with a green stripe, had pooled beside him. She picked it up and placed it in his lap. Then she stood. She turned to the center of the mat, took her stance, and adjusted the space with one step. Her posture reset. Her hands floated into place. And then she performed the same combination, the same one Jared had shouted through once, in silence. Every motion was clean, balanced, controlled. The strikes came in slow succession, with such clarity that even the untrained could follow the rhythm. Her final movement landed inches from the floor. She held it for a breath, then released. No one clapped. A man in the back row, a retired master who hadn't spoken all afternoon, leaned forward and whispered something to the person beside him. Another guest leaned in. A murmur passed between them. Someone recognized her. Rachel bowed. The mirror behind the mat caught her reflection still, composed, sharp against the haze of stunned faces. She turned, walked back to the edge of the room, and resumed her seat. No speech, no smile, just silence. The child had been taken aside. A staffer helped him up, speaking now in hushed tones. Jared stepped off the mat, visibly shaken. Kirkland whispered something to Lexi. No one resumed the demonstration. The branded banners fluttered slightly in the breeze from the open door. The weight in the room had shifted, but no one knew quite why. Only that something had happened. Something they weren't ready to name. And still, Rachel sat, a quiet woman in a plain G, barefoot and unnoticed until now. The silence that followed Rachel's demonstration was heavier than applause. It didn't lift when the lights dimmed, or when Jared stepped off the mat with his jaw clenched and Lexi turned her back to the crowd. The room had changed. Faces that once brimmed with smug certainty now held unease. Whispers passed between rows, hushed and confused. Parents leaned toward one another, searching for context they didn't have. The sparring was over, but something unfinished hung in the air. Rachel remained seated, hands resting lightly on her knees, her gaze lowered. She made no move to clarify, explain, or reclaim the mat. She didn't need to. The stillness around her had already begun to speak. Then a voice broke the quiet, not loud, not urgent, but clear. "Master Callahan," said Master Endo, standing from the back row. His voice carried across the hall with surprising strength. He stepped onto the mat, his spine straight despite his years, and walked to where Rachel sat. Without hesitation, he bowed deeply. Murmurs rippled again. A woman near the front turned to her friend. "Did he say Callahan?" Another leaned into her husband. "That's the founder's name, isn't it?" A few heads swiveled toward the large framed portrait hanging near the entrance, the founder in a crisp white jai. Eyes calm. The name Callahan etched below in gold. Kirkland approached, expression caught somewhere between annoyance and confusion. "Master Endo," he said, forcing a smile. "I think you may be mistaken. She's a visitor, not even a ranked student." Endo didn't turn. "I'm not mistaken." He looked to the crowd. "That is Rachel Callahan, daughter of Master David Callahan, former national champion, and owner of this dojo." Gasps cut through the air like wind through paper. Rachel didn't move. She only looked up, her expression unreadable, then gently lowered her eyes again. Kirkland laughed, short and brittle. "That's absurd. We'd know if—" "She doesn't need to speak," came another voice. At the back of the room, a woman stepped forward. She wore slacks and a dark blouse, her expression calm, professional. She carried a leather folder in her arms. With measured steps, she walked to the center of the room and placed it on the instructor's podium. She opened it without fanfare, revealing pages of documentation. The dojo's deed, stamped with the gold seal of the state registry, articles of incorporation, transfer contracts, all signed, all dated. This dojo was reacquired 3 years ago," the assistant said, "by Rachel Callahan, through a trust registered under her name. All operations were permitted to continue under your direction, Master Kirkland, until further review. That review is now complete." Jared had gone pale. Lexi stared at the paperwork as if it were in a foreign language. Kirkland leaned over the documents, reading faster than his eyes could keep up. "This has to be a mistake. She never... Why wasn't I—" He stopped. One of the investors, now stone-faced, had pulled out his phone and was reading the same documents, already forwarded by the assistant. Rachel stood. She walked past the podium without a glance and approached the far wall, where the stylized corporate motto was framed in gold: "Discipline first, victory follows." She reached up and gently lifted it from its hook. Behind it, half hidden in dust and shadow, was the original scroll. The ink had faded with time, but the founder's hand was unmistakable. "Do not raise your voice." It read, "Raise your discipline." She held the new frame for a moment, then turned and placed it on the floor. Not discarded, not broken, just removed. She bowed to the older scroll, then turned to Master Endo. Her voice was quiet, steady. "The dojo is yours to guide now." He bowed again, deeply, in acceptance. Rachel walked to the edge of the mat. Her assistant waited with her sandals, but Rachel didn't take them. She knelt and placed them at the small altar by the wall, a gesture not of submission, but of legacy. One final bow. The crowd didn't speak. No one applauded. No one moved. She walked barefoot across the mat, the same path she had taken in silence for weeks. Only now, the silence meant something else. Kirkland stepped aside. Lexi lowered her gaze. Jared said nothing. Rachel paused at the door, her figure silhouetted against the light pouring in from the hallway. The room behind her held still, every person watching not with fear, not with guilt, but with something closer to reverence. She did not look back, and she did not need to. She had not reclaimed her power. She had revealed it, quietly, irrefutably. The banner fluttered once, then fell still, and the dojo finally remembered who it belonged to. The crowd hadn't moved. Some still sat as if waiting for permission. Others remained standing, arms crossed, eyes lowered, the silence stretching long after Rachel had stepped away from the mat. The ornate banner bearing the corporate motto lay quietly on the floor, no one daring to lift it. Rachel knelt beneath the founder's portrait. The old scroll was back in its rightful place, anchored with care against the wall where it had once watched over every bow, every form, every sparring round that had meant something more than display. She straightened its edge with one touch, then bowed low. When she rose, her posture was effortless, stiller than still. The dojo had belonged to her father, but now it belonged to itself again. She turned and scanned the room once, not for praise, not for apology, but for confirmation. Students looked down. Parents avoided her gaze. Even the investors, once quick to speak, sat mute in their chairs. The weight of recognition had settled over them like ash, silent and irreversible. Rachel walked across the mat with even steps, each movement soft and balanced. At the edge of the floor, beside the small altar where students placed their sandals, she paused. Her pair waited there, simple and worn. She didn't put them on. Instead, she folded a towel, the same one Lexi had tossed her a week earlier, and placed it beside her sandals. Then she turned to Mia Torres, the assistant instructor who had always greeted students with care, who corrected gently, and whose eyes never shifted to the cameras during class. "Yours now?" Rachel said. Mia nodded once. No questions, no disbelief, just a quiet breath, like someone who had waited a long time to be seen. Rachel bowed to her, a full bow, and Mia returned it. The air shifted again. As Rachel approached the door, students slowly parted. One boy, no older than 10, dropped into a kneel beside the mat. He bowed low, forehead to the floor. Others followed without cue. The movement rippled quietly down the line. Jared stood near the mirror, but didn't speak. Lexi's arms were crossed, her jaw tight. Kirkland sat behind the podium, staring at the deed, unreadable. Rachel passed without a word. Outside, the hallway was quiet. Her assistant waited near the doors, arms folded, eyes shining without a trace of triumph. They said nothing. Rachel stepped through the glass doors barefoot, the smooth concrete cool beneath her soles. A sound followed light footsteps. She turned. A small girl ran up, holding a water bottle with both hands. "You forgot this," she said softly. "Will you come back?" Rachel smiled, just once, then gently touched the girl's shoulder. "It's yours now," she said. Behind them, the dojo doors remained open. Inside, Mia stood at the front of the room, alone for a moment before two students flanked her. Another assistant pulled a rope near the wall, lifting a fresh banner white canvas with deep black ink strokes, the founder's original calligraphy. "Do not raise your voice, raise your discipline." No one clapped, no one cheered. They simply watched it rise. Rachel walked to the sidewalk with her assistant beside her. The sky was pale with dusk. The air was still. The dojo sat behind them, changed, though nothing dramatic had been said or done. It didn't need to be. Justice had already happened. Not with noise, not with force, but with presence. And the quiet she left behind said more than any name ever could. She was mocked, overlooked, and treated like a nobody in the very place she once called home. But Rachel Callahan never raised her voice. She never demanded respect. Instead, she waited, watched, and moved only when it mattered. Through quiet endurance, she revealed what true strength looks like, not in titles or showmanship, but in stillness, clarity, and grace. Her power was never in what she claimed, but in what she chose to protect. In the end, she did not reclaim the dojo. She restored it. Her story is a reminder that self-worth doesn't need approval, and that real authority often arrives without announcement. Sometimes the most powerful presence in the room is the one no one sees coming. If this story moved you, take a moment to reflect. Share your thoughts in the comments, or follow for more quiet, powerful stories that honor the strength it takes to remain unseen and unwavering.